Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome everyone to today's event, From Identity Politics to a Non-Fragmented Analysis of Oppression, a keynote address by scholar, activist, and musician Ochy Curiel. This event is part of a week-long workshop called the Global Black Feminism Summer Lab, a program of the Black Studies Collaboratory. My name is Lee Rayford, and I'm an associate professor of African American Studies here at UC Berkeley. And I'm the inaugural director of the Black Studies Collaboratory, which is a recipient of a Mellon Foundation's Just Futures grant, a collaborative initiative to address racial inequality through bold and unique humanities-based research projects. The Global Black Feminism Summer Lab is one of the programs of the BSC. I'm joining you today from Berkeley, California, my home, and this campus are sited on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone, the successors of the historic and sovereign band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familial descendants of the Verona band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. We acknowledge and pay respect to Muwekma Ohlone ancestors, peoples today, and the Muwekma Ohlone future to come. In acknowledging the Ohlone history of this land, we acknowledge that the Ohlone people are thriving members of the Berkeley community who are actively imagining more just futures and engaging the tools that are needed to do that imaginative work. Whether you are joining us from Ohlone land, from elsewhere on Turtle Island, or elsewhere in the world, thank you for being with us today. Land acknowledgements, of course, constitute an effort to name and make visible histories of dispossession, violence, ongoing struggle, resistance, refusal, and also joy that have been erased. And for the Black Studies Collaboratory, concerned with the history and future of Black life on stolen lands, this is a shared effort. Our project, the Black Studies Collaboratory, asks what is the role of Black studies in building a more just future? What lessons from Black feminist, Black radical, and Black intellectual traditions can we apply to this moment in history? And how do we solidify our commitment to Black studies as a public good? Among our goals for the Black Studies Collaboratory is to provide space for critical engagement and collaborative dreaming, to create opportunities for joyful and generative engagement among Black faculty, students, staff, the surrounding community, the country, and the world. Since receiving the grant in January 2021 and until its conclusion in December 2023, our work will consist of academic year think tanks, summer labs for graduate students like this one, research grants for faculty and students, and a university course open to the public. The Black Futures Retreat, organized in collaboration with a host of community partners, will be the culmination of the initiative, and you can learn more at our department website, the Department of African American Studies. I'm going to turn it over to our lead organizer for the Global Black Feminism Summer Lab, Dr. Tiana Pichel. Tiana is an associate professor of African American Studies and Sociology here at UC Berkeley. She's the author of the multiple award-winning book, Becoming Black Political Subjects, Movements and Ethno-Racial Rights in Colombia and Brazil. And Tiana is the co-principal investigator with me on the Black Studies Collaboratory Mellon Grant. I also want to add that Tiana is a dancer, a gardener, a parent, a lover of spreadsheets and deep belly laughs. And it's my great good fortune to work with Tiana on this grant as co-conspirator and comrade dreamer. And with that, I hand it over to you, Dr. Pichel. Welcome again to everyone joining us today.
Thank you so much, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone, or good night, good morning, good everything. I'm so happy that you're all here to join us today. It looks like we have 82 people so far. we are still here on Zoom, but we're still here. Before I introduce the Summer Lab and our keynote speaker, I'd like to first let everyone know that there is interpretation for this event. And it's in English and Spanish. So if you need interpretation, please click on the globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen to choose either English or Spanish. And I actually like to introduce the interpreters because they are doing really, really important work and labor for us. And I think we should recognize that work within a Black feminist praxis. So we have Marci Valdivieso and we have Isidra Mencos, both from the company Accent on Languages. Thank you so much for joining us and making this more of a transnational dialogue that can happen. So today's event is the launch of our inaugural year of the Global Black Feminism Summer Lab here at Berkeley. Lee Rayford and I are overjoyed to see this transpire. We've been dreaming it up for many years, and particularly in the wake of a number of events that were held on this campus organized by students honoring the life, struggle, and influence of Marielle Franco. But this Summer Lab and this work is in thinking critically with Black feminism around the African diaspora is a legacy that we stepped into when we became professors in the Department of African American Studies here at UC Berkeley. From Veve Clark, one of the visionaries behind our doctoral program in African Diaspora Studies, a program that has always had Black feminism and Black women's knowledges at its center, to June Jordan's earth-changing work, including her Poetry for the People program here, to Barbara Christian's lasting legacy, which among many other things includes teaching a course on Black feminisms in the African diaspora 3 decades ago. So we step into this inheritance, into this tradition of global Black feminism humbly, a tradition that was always informed by and often in conversation with Black feminisms around the globe, and especially Black feminisms in the Caribbean, a place where Barbara Christian, June Jordan, and Veve Clark all had roots. The Global Black Feminism Summer Lab this year is the first of 3 summer institutes that will offer an interdisciplinary group of 9 doctoral students a week-long experience aimed at further developing their scholarship according to the legacies and futures of Black feminism. It is an opportunity to learn from each other, to get advice about how to navigate and grow in this field, and to get constructive feedback on their work from leading Black feminists in the field. This year, we welcome Professors Moya Bailey, Yomaira Figueroa Vasquez, and Kristen Smith. We are so thankful to have you, and we look forward to what we hope will be a really generative week. And I would like to take a minute to thank our team, starting with our project manager, Barbara Montano, who has lifted mountains to make this happen, as well as Sandy Richmond, Maria del Rosario Heredia for all their tireless work, and also our team here of exceptional graduate students, Gilberto Rosa Duran, Delphine Sims, and Rachel Anspach, all of which helped not only with the logistics of this event, but contributed so much to the envisioning of this lab. They helped us conceptualize and put into practice the ethics of care that we hope to center. They asked hard questions about how to live up to the global parts of the Global Black Feminisms Lab. And the final shape of this program really is due to their brilliance and dedication. Thank you so much for thinking with us and making this happen. One of the political epistemological decisions that Lee and I and the team made early on in the planning for this event was a commitment to think about Black feminisms across different geographies and times, but also to center not just the work of Black feminists outside of, Black feminist work outside of the United States, but the actual ideas and practices of Black feminists themselves in these places. So in that vein, over this week, we will be reading Black feminist writings about and from different places in the world. In some cases, this meant commissioning the English translations, the first English translations of work by writers like Black Puerto Rican writer Mayra Santos Febres and our illustrious keynote speaker, Ochy Curiel. We are also so thankful to Kristen Smith, Archie Davies, and Bethania Gomes for making new translations to English available to us by the great Black Brazilian feminist and activist Beatriz Nascimento, available to our lab participants. Without further ado, I am so honored to be able to welcome our keynote speaker, who will orient and inform the lab's work this week and beyond. And I'm gonna switch to Spanish, or I'm gonna try.
Ochy Curiel was born in the Dominican Republic, and she currently lives in Colombia. Doctor of Social Anthropology of the University of Colombia, higher education specialist, social sciences mention from the Autonomous University in Santo Domingo, and a bachelor in social work from the Universidad Católica Madre y Maestra in Santo Domingo. She is a professor and researcher at the National University and the University Javeriana in Bogotá, Colombia. She is a member of the Latin American Group of Feminist Studies, Training and Action, Estudio, Formación y Acción Feminista, and of the Tremenda Revoltosa Feminist Drumming Circle or Association. She's also a singer-songwriter, an activist of the autonomous, anti-racist, decolonial lesbian feminist movement with many published works, where her book, The Straight Nation, an analysis of legal discourse and the heterosexual regime from the anthropology of domination, stands out. It was published in 2013. She has been a co-editor of several articles and books where she elaborates from a decolonial perspective analysis of racism, heterosexualism, classism, and all those systems of domination. Dr. Ochy Curiel, I found out about your work when I was finishing my doctoral thesis, and I found out about your focus on the Black movements in Colombia and Brazil around 2007-2010, when you were setting up those classes at the National University that would change the study of gender at that university, country, and region. Your intellectual, political, and artistic work has contributed to a deepening of feminism. Our conceptualization of oppression and the possibilities of social transformation. She has made us reconsider the direction of the theorizations and to question the systems of power that work within our institutions and movements. Activist and artist, Dr. Ochy Curiel has inspired and continues to inspire new generations of Black, indigenous, anti-racist, decolonial feminists in this hemisphere and the world. Her contributions are ample, and it is an honor to have you here with us. Please join us in giving a warm virtual welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ochy Curiel. Thank you, Tiana. Thank you so much. What a beautiful presentation. I want firstly to also thank our ancestors, our ancestresses, and our ancestors who are with us in this virtual presentation. It's a pity we are not there physically. I believe this pandemic has almost messed up our lives in many aspects, especially in those few interactions we've had. However, we're going to try to do our best to connect from our hearts. I want to thank the Black Studies Collaboratory of the Afro-American Studies at UC Berkeley and the Global Laboratory, the Black Global Laboratory, especially Tiana and all the people who have worked. Tiana has mentioned many people many people who we are not seeing, but thanks to those people, it's possible to have these gatherings. I would like to send a message. I hope that everyone is in good health. At this moment, I think that that is the most important thing. The people who are in the streets, in the demonstrations in Colombia, there's a national strike that's been going on for more than 2 months. There are many people who've mobilized, the Afro people, the indigenous people, for better conditions, for dignity. So a big hug for all the people and everyone who live in places of struggle. I am going to share some slides, especially to guide the conversation. Unfortunately, I will have to be reading, and this is primarily due to the interpreters making it easier to follow the thread. I thank them very much. I will go from slide to slide. There are not many, but it's important so that we have the possibility to continue my presentation. I hope that you're seeing the slides. Do you see them? If someone can confirm. Yes, the only thing is that you can see the entire screen. This is an issue that is very important for me because of our histories, because of our personal histories, our experiences. And I'm going to start to read in a moment. And the issue is from identity policing to a non-fragmented analysis of oppressions. And it's important for me because part of my experience, and we know that the experience for Black activism, for the creation of knowledge, I don't know what's going on with my screen. I'm sorry. I don't know, Dr. Ochy Curiel. I think that's fine. Well, if I don't share the screen, it's fine. The most important thing is to see your face. That's the most important. So, very well. Well, I was saying that in order to approach the title, which is about identity politics to a non-fragmented view of oppressions, a feminist decolonial analysis, to address the content of the title I suggested, the common thread of this presentation will be my activism, my experience, and my thinking as an Afro-feminist, autonomist, anti-racist, lesbian feminist, and decolonialist. I try to practice and be coherent because experience is a source of production. And so, first off, I will describe an important experience for me from a collective of Afro women in the Dominican Republic. Pioneers in doing activism against racism, sexism, and classism to address the limits of identity politics and the contributions of Afro-feminists in considering the intertwining of oppressions, through my position as a feminist lesbian, and then finish with what I propose as a decolonial feminist for political thought and practice. That would be more or less the thread. In the late 80s and early 90s, a group of Black women emerged in the Dominican Republic, interested in addressing racism and sexism as a political claiming, who constituted La Casa por la Identidad de las Mujeres Negras, which we later called La Casa por la Identidad de las Mujeres Afros, which has to do with the political analysis that we were doing at the time. It was one of the pioneering experiences in the region in this regard. In addition to being the main drivers organizing the first Latin American and Caribbean meeting of Black women and promoting the network of Afro-Latin and Afro-Caribbean women and forming what at one time we called the Black Women's Movement. In several works, and in trying to systematically structure the research I conducted with 3 groups of Afro women in Honduras, Brazil, and the Dominican Republic, I addressed different moments of the collective political action of this movement. I defined and characterized 3 moments for this purpose, considering fundamentally the political emphases, although these moments were never separated. The first I called the definition of an identity policy. I analyzed how identity politics was one of the first strategies that we took on as a movement, through reaffirming a subjectivity of women and Blacks as individuals and as a social group. The fundamental actions were around rescuing what at that time we called the Black or Afro culture, and in them the role of women of African descent. The second moment I defined as a political work towards the exterior. That began to crystallize in the early 90s, I argued that even though identity politics was maintained, fundamental political work shifted from inward to outward work, toward other Black women, toward marginalized communities, and toward society at large. The visibility of racism and sexism and the effects on women, together with their denunciation and combat, were the political emphases of this second moment. Framed in the concept of human rights, in the demand for social and cultural recognition, the fundamental actions were training and education, communication campaigns, among others. The third moment I called the national, regional, and global articulation. It began with the holding of the first meeting of Black women in July 1992 and the creation of the network of Latin American and Afro-Caribbean women, participation in different regional activities, and participation in different world conferences, such as the one in Beijing and later with the Conference Against Racism, among others. I would like to deepen our conversation on a few points at this stage. Firstly, identity politics allowed us to increase individual and collective self-esteem around the recognition of being Black and then Afro women. This political identity allowed us to mobilize, to meet shared experiences. It allowed us to recover an ancestrality lost because of racism and sexism dating since the time of colonization. The cultural actions taken allowed many of us to decolonize our religious practices, marked hegemonically by Judeo-Christianity, and recover spiritualities of African origin. It also allowed us to question an aesthetic marked by westernization of bodies and to build, legitimize, and value a Black aesthetic according to our own experiences. This moment allowed many of us to recognize ourselves individually and collectively as well, and through that recognition to begin to demand naming and social recognition as Black women. While many of us lived this moment with crisis, pride, pleasure, and even radical positions, it was also characterized by essentialism and homogenization. We assumed we were all the same, a political mistake that we criticized in white feminism. Class, sexuality, privileges, context, places of enunciation, declaration among Black women were not axes of reflection, they were in fact axes of tension. There was an expectation of a unique, almost universal Black woman must be that we all seemed to have to fulfill. The non-reflection of our differences did not help us much to delve into our complex positions in the world and to define more specifically the social and political projects to which we were attached, having focused only on the Black issue and the issue of women. The second moment, the work towards the outside or the external, although it did not displace the politics of identity, allowed us to show the effects of racism and sexism on Black women, a moment I believe is especially important because together with the Dominican Haitian Women's Movement, or MUDA, we were fundamental in placing them on the public stage, in the cultural and artistic movement, in educational policies, in social movements, etc. However, we were limited to seeing these oppressions as phenomena, to acting on their effects rather than to identifying them as a discrimination, quote unquote. At the time, we did not have the tools to analyze racism and sexism as central epistemes of Western modernity. I will return to this later. The third moment, the national, regional, and global articulation, although it transnationalized our actions by connecting with other groups in other countries, by promoting the network of Afro-Latin and Afro-Caribbean women, also made us part of the establishment. Although La Casa, or the house for the identity of Afro women, never had much money to act, and part of our work was done pro bono, the logic we assumed in recent years was fundamentally establishment. Just as the women's and feminist movement was immersed in the same. We were part of the Uogenization, or female organization. We followed the agendas of the UN through the processes around Beijing after the International Conference Against Racism, and this became more present through the network. Even this policy of transnationalization was strongly marked by identity politics. Based on this small roundabout, I'd like to explain my positions to date. While I claim and position myself as an Afro woman with a particular history of being born and raised in the Dominican Republic, a country that is mostly and predominantly Afro-descendant and that is an important part of my personal and political history, I'm not just that. I'm also a feminist lesbian, migrant, musician, autonomist feminist, anti-capitalist, among other political positions. But above all, I consider myself an activist who seeks social transformation. And for this, I consider it necessary to end oppressions, all of them, and that is not solved by identity politics. For me, being Black or Afro today is not enough, although it is still especially important as a political place. In the 90s, I became an autonomist feminist, and from this experience with other Latin American and Caribbean feminists, we began to delve into the complexity and define the problems, the reasons that the establishment touched us as a movement. For many of us, this establishment was a product of neocolonial and developmentalist policies from the Western North that found the complicity of many feminists in the region and many Afro women. From the Western North, through the rhetoric of development, seen as a utopia of emancipation, of advancement from places of power, it was assumed and continues to be assumed that the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean were incapable of their own developments, and then it was necessary to intervene and to control. To understand what I'm stating is to contextualize this decade and see some of its effects to date. The decade of the 90s marked the strengthening of neoliberalism that placed the market and the economy as centers of social life and financial capitals as the center of the market on a transnational level through implementing structural adjustment. These policies, made by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, promoted that the Latin American and Caribbean peoples would live a stage of economic growth with equity, but the reality was and is different. Poverty levels continue to increase in our peoples to date. Since this decade, democracy has become a mechanism for selecting rulers who administer the political system based on market criteria, while opening processes for citizen participation. Along with this economic hardening derived from the neoliberal doctrine and imposed through structural adjustment plans, there's a certain political softening, a reorganization of the balances between politics and economics. It's in this context that the UN's world conferences and their policies aimed at citizen participation are placed. A supposed citizen participation should be promoted to limit the actions of protests in the region and to achieve a certain political statehood to ensure the perfect entry of neoliberalism. So many believe that participating in UN conferences through their necessary representative networks, as the Afro Women's Network did in its second stage, was the way to influence governments to promote certain social policies with equity. For many movements, such as the feminist Afro women's movements, among others, this generated more economic, ideological, and political dependence on the UN and international development cooperation from the North, and as a result generated less autonomy, greater bureaucratization, and hierarchy on the part of most social movements. At this very time, there's a rise of multiculturalism as a state policy. Although in part it was also the result of many struggles of indigenous and Black movements that questioned the homogeneous nation based on the ideology of miscegenation, which made invisible subjects such as Afros and indigenous people, who were not previously considered part of the nation and who are then included through cultural recognition. From the logic of the states, this multiculturalism was deeply liberal. While in many constitutions there was a recognition of cultural diversity passing to multi-ethnic and multicultural nations, The material and political reality of most indigenous and Black peoples did not change much. Today, the social, political, and cultural inequalities of these peoples are clear. In this decade as well, as a feminist lesbian, I politicized desire. I assume that being a lesbian who wants and goes to bed with women is a transgressive political act in the face of compulsory heterosexuality. However, for many years, I also assumed it as an identity. From the theoretical, political contributions of feminist lesbianism, I understood that heterosexuality is a political regime that transcends sexual experiences, even if it includes them. It is a regime that acts in all social relations and that has to do with the effects of colonialism and Western modernity. In the nuclearization of the family, in the conceptions and expectations that we have around what a woman and a man should be, in the sexual binarism that supports the ideology of sexual difference, in the appropriation and exploitation of women's bodies in the labor force, whether or not these are lesbians, and even more so in those who are racialized as Black and as indigenous. From these analyses, I began to understand the relationship between racism, sexism, classism, with heterosexualism. The theoretical and political contributions of Black feminists and lesbians were fundamental to get where I am today. Black feminism in the U.S., such as Hill Collins, 1988, Women of Color, Moraga, and Ansaldúa, 1981, Black women in Britain, and Black feminists in Latin America and the Caribbean, who very early in the 70s proposed to address the intertwining of oppressions such as racism, classism, heterosexualism, among others, always based on situated experiences. To understand the interdependence of oppressions is not about placing variables that conform a summation of experiences or an intersection of analytical categories or axes of differences. It's about understanding how these oppressions have historically pierced our region, from colonialism to contemporary coloniality, and how they found expression in certain subjects who have not had the privileges of race, class, gender, and sexuality, such as the Black, indigenous, and peasant women of the region. In the last few years, the contributions of Latin American and Caribbean thinkers have been essential. Critics linked to the decolonizing turns, such as Castro Gomez and Gros Foguel, who, from the concept of decoloniality, propose a new understanding for our Latin American and Caribbean experiences, which imply a rereading of history, new philosophies, new epistemologies that help bring forth a political action that is more decolonizing and transformative. From this understanding, it is proposed that with the end of colonialism as the geopolitical and geohistorical constitution of Western European modernity, the international division of work between the center and the peripheries, as well as the ethnic racial hierarchization of populations and the formation of the nation-states in the periphery, were not significantly transformed. On the contrary, what has happened is a transition from modern colonialism to global colonialism. This global colonialism has been possible thanks to institutions of global capital such as the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF, and the World Bank, as well as military organizations such as NATO, intelligence agencies, and the Pentagon, and I would add the international cooperation of the North. From this perspective, Ramon Gros Foguel proposes that we are faced with a European or Euro-North American capitalist modern patriarchal colonial system world, and I would add heterosexual. All this has meant that up to now, a world pattern of power that the Peruvian Aníbal Quijano referred to as the coloniality of power, which has meant relations of exploitation, domination, conflict around the dispute for control, and the power over labor and its products, nature and its resources of production, sex and its products, the reproduction of the species, subjectivity and its products, material and intersubjective, including knowledge and authority and their instruments of coercion. For Quijano, this coloniality has been supported by the construction of the idea of race, but for Maria Lugones, it has also been supported by the idea of a binary gender, heterosexual and modern, as she condenses her idea in the concept of the modern colonial system of gender, Lugones 2008. All this has been linked to the notion of humanity imposed by Western modernity, which initiated with the debate around Indians and then Blacks being human. The colonized females and males were not women nor men, and they were not considered human, and this has an effect even today in populations that were particularly racialized. About this aspect, the Puerto Rican Nelson Maldonado Torres in 2007 proposes the concept of coloniality of being, which has implied the negation of humanity. the interiorization of populations, especially indigenous and Afro-descendants, which have been considered an obstacle for Christianization and later for modernization. This negation of being has been the justification to enslave them, take away their lands, waging war against them, or simply assassinate them. They are, as Frantz Fanon would say, the condemned of the earth. The Eurocentric Western modernity also generated a coloniality of knowledge, Lander 2000, a type of scientific, technical, epistemological rationality that takes for granted it is the valid model of production of knowledge. This knowledge from this vision must be neutral, objective, universal, and positive. As the Colombian Santiago Castro Gomez in 2007 points out, it claims to be the point zero of observation, able to translate and document with fidelity the characteristics of an exotic nature and culture. From there, a great universal narrative is generated in which Europe and the United States are simultaneously the geographical center and the culmination of the temporal movement of knowledge, where the knowledges of the subordinated populations are undervalued, ignored, excluded, silenced, and made invisible. By accepting these bets and analyses, by gathering our own experiences as Afro-activists, feminist lesbians, autonomists from Latin America and the Caribbean, today some of us are building what we understand as a decolonial feminism, and I believe it contributes significantly to a new proposal of collective action for Afro women, but also a whole proposal that intends social transformation from a place-location such as Latin America and the Caribbean. The concept of decolonial feminism was proposed by the Argentinian Maria Lugones in 2008. Yuderquis Espinosa points out that decolonial is a movement that's growing and maturing and that proclaims its revisionism of feminism's theory and political proposal, given what it considers its bourgeois, white, and Western bias. Espinosa, 2013. One of the main sources of decolonial feminism has been Black feminism, Afrofeminism, and or the movement of Afro-Latin and Afro-Caribbean women who have questioned the homogenization and universalization of the subject woman that hegemonic feminism has supported in its theories and political practices. They have made key contributions not just to feminism and other social movements, but also to any project of liberation and social transformation, even for critical social sciences. The non-fragmentation of realities pierced by race, sex, gender, sexuality, and class. From the United States, the women and lesbians of color united in the collective Rio Combahee were pioneers, constituting what they called Black feminism, and in the first public declaration in 1977, they pointed out, "The most general declaration of our policy right now would be that we are committed to fighting against racial, sexual, heterosexual, and classist oppression, and that our specific task is the development of an analysis and practice based on where the major systems of oppression are linked. The synthesis of these oppressions creates our lives. As Black women, we see Black feminism as the logical political movement to fight the simultaneous and multiple oppressions which face all women of color. We united initially through a combined anti-racist and anti-sexist position, and as we develop politically, we address heterosexism and the financial oppression of capitalism." Combahee, River Collective, 1988. In Latin America and the Caribbean, what was called the movement of Afro-Latin and Afro-Caribbean women in the 80s arose questioning white and hegemonic feminism that rested its theorizations and political practices only upon gender, and the mixed Black movement that based its politics only upon race. As the Afro-Brazilian Sueli Carneiro has maintained, we Afro-Latin and Afro-Caribbean women had to blacken feminism and feminize the anti-racist struggle, and at the same time build a collective political subject able to incorporate these perspectives into both movements, but that it also had its own internal constructions and points of view of the Afro-descendants. The other concept is matrix of domination, proposed by Patricia Hill Collins in 1988. For Hill Collins, this matrix is structured by the interaction between sexism, racism, homo-lesbophobia, colonialism, and classism, generating a hierarchical system with multiple levels of oppression and expressed in what she calls domains of power that contain structural elements such as laws, institutional policies, disciplinary aspects referring to bureaucratic hierarchies and vigilance techniques, ideas and hegemonic ideologies and interpersonal aspects, and the usual discriminatory practices in daily experience. The other concept is intersectionality, proposed by Kimberly Crenshaw. Positioning herself in the critical theory of the law, she shows how women of color do not inscribe themselves separately in the categories of race and gender because doing that makes the experience of Afro-American women invisible. For Euderquis Espinosas in 2013, Decolonial Feminism takes up the critical legacy of indigenous women who from Latin America and the Caribbean have posed the problem of invisibility inside their movements and inside feminism itself, initiating a work of revision of the role and importance they've had in the realization and resistance of their communities. The materialistic French feminism, with its early questioning of the idea of nature, its understanding of the category of women as a class of sex, and the analysis of heterosexuality as a political regime. It has also nourished the critical revision of essentialism, the subject of feminism, and the identity politics developed by postmodernist feminism. On that same note, they recover the legacy of key authors of post-colonial feminism with their criticism to epistemic violence, the possibility of strategic essentialism, the call for feminist solidarity, North-South, and the criticism of colonialism of the production of knowledges of the feminist academia settled in the North. Decolonial feminism also gathers some of the criticisms of the Latin American autonomist feminist trend, including a condemnation of the ideological and economic dependence introduced by developmentalist policies in so-called third world countries, as well as a process of establishment and technocratization of social movements that impose a global agenda of rights useful to neocolonial interests related to the logics of international cooperation from the North. As we can see, decolonial feminism is based on the contributions we've made from different positions critical of feminism, aside from the contributions of the decolonial turn that I introduced before. A decolonial feminist perspective means several issues that are crucial for us to redefine in current political practice. 1. To understand how the system of Western colonial modern world was formed, which had race and gender as central epistemes to achieve capitalist expansion through colonialism, that implies a rereading of the history and an understanding of what its expressions are today, how it's formed in the international, national, and local division of labor, be that sexual, heterosexual, racial, and social, that affects fundamentally Black, Indigenous, lesbian, and migrant women from our populations. 2. Understand the current relationship of the capitalist accumulation with the plunder of territories to install mega projects by multinationals, territories inhabited by Black, Indigenous, and peasant poor people. 3. Understand the relationship between the femicides, the violence against women, and the logic of militarism, drug trafficking, and money laundering that place low-income, highly racialized populations of women and female teenagers and children as war bounty. 4. Understand the discourses and policies of nationalist states centered on a liberal multiculturalism that supposedly recognizes cultural, racial, and ethnic diversity, which helps it maintain a liberal democracy that doesn't end inequities, whose valid paradigm continues to be modern, white, male, heterosexual, Catholic, and that many social movements, as they reclaim equity within its paradigm, keep holding up. 5. Understand that if identity politics is important as positioning, it cannot be important as the end goal. Any project of social transformation from our perspective must be done for projects that tear down oppressions. And here it is important to form alliances with movements that also intend to end oppressions. Our realities are not only marked by being Black and by the racism and sexism that affect us, but they are also marked by the effects of labor flexibility, by the effects of consumerism, by the effects of different types of violence, by global and local politics that place us in situations of precariousness. Given all of this, I think that we need, among others, 3 main issues. 1. The systematic study of how the whole world works, the ways in which racism, sexism, classism, heterosexuality, and all the oppressions take place, from theories to critical interpretations, from other epistemologies that allow us to interpret our realities, and in Latin America as well as the Caribbean, there are important analysis and interpretations created by subordinated subjects whose knowledge has never been recognized. So we can define from that point our political actions. This will allow us to act from the foundation of political projects that intend to tear down the oppressions in an interdependent manner, in which identity politics are basically strategic and relevant positionings. 2. foster autonomous policies from the social movements, as well as local institutions that emphasize the priorities of the movements. This will allow for ideological, material, and epistemic autonomy, and to avoid depending on the neocolonial agendas of global institutions like the UN, the World Bank, AIS, and international cooperation. 3. Reinforce the transnational alliances from critical social movements. The monster is big and global, so our politics also need to be, even if it has a local implementation. These alliances cannot be those institutional networks that go to big hotels and take over representation of the movements. They must come from international solidarity, from subordinated subjects that allow us to reinforce our struggles. Thank you, Ochy, for your presentation. What I like so much about your work is that you're creating conceptualizations that are important, but you're also creating genealogies. And my first question has to do with that. In this speech and in your work, and generally, we have to recognize that Afro-Latin American feminist indigenous thoughts have their own construction, their own logic, their own points of view. And this is a theme that you develop in your work. And I'm thinking more in an article that you wrote in 2007, where you mentioned the contributions of Lelia Gonzalez, Sueli Cainero, Marta Sanchez Nestor to think about post-colonialism. And I wanted to know if you can talk about a little more about the internal structures, our own constructions. It's so interesting to find out in the feminist movements, they're acting upon the world and the conversations that they're having. But often the work of Black feminists writing in English and then translating to Spanish and Portuguese and all other languages, it's not as common to do it in the other direction. For those people who don't know the work, that important work that you have done, the Afro-Latin American colleagues. Thank you for that question. That work in 2007 was a product of self-guided investigation. I didn't have a grant or any money for that. At the moment, I chose 3 groups, one in Honduras, in Brazil, and one in the Dominican Republic, precisely because I was interested in finding the contributions. Our contribution, I was also there because one of the things I maintain today is that the geopolitics of knowledge is problematic, particularly for us as subordinate subjects. Because in the United States, even if it's through Black feminism, it's the one that's most known, it's the one that's most translated. And I have to say that before we found out of the Black feminism of the United States, and I say it from my own experience, even though obviously Black feminists have been key in our thought, before that, we were already producing, we were already acting the matrix of oppression, of racism. I wanted to say how in this region, in Abya Yala, we were producing, our colleagues were producing in their own communities. That's where I highlight Leila Gonzalez's work. It's almost unknown. She was one of the pioneers in the region to speak about what today would be called intersectionality. Leila, years ago, was talking about making analysis about the false racial democracy in Brazil and making a call to the feminist movement, to the Black movement in Brazil, like the unified Black movement, to have And people are saying, Viva Leila Gonzalez, of course. The need to interweave the struggles. She was our pioneer, and she's almost unknown. In the last few years, some production has been made known, but Leila has so much. And so does Sueli Carneiro. We've been working with her for many years. After this article, I've written other articles. There are intellectuals, as I am. One of the things that we're doing today in the Dominican Republic is to rescue the knowledge within the communities from the grandmothers, from the oral tradition, and how these women have this knowledge about cooking, culinary knowledge, but social knowledge as well. They're fundamental, and it's a work that we have to do. No one else is going to do it for us. What's most marvelous about this moment, there are younger women, much younger than us, of course, that are doing marvelous things, that are recovering all this knowledge. And I think the only way to recover and to recognize the work among Afro women, among subalterns, is to create our own ethnographies. That's why my proposal is to study the anthropology of domination, hegemony, decolonial anthropology, and to create decolonial ethnographies so that we carry out our own research, so that people who are white and privileged will not come to do the research for us. I want to motivate our comrades who are here to continue streamlining those stories. Thank you. Well, yes, I imagine there are many people who are younger than I also to do that work that they're already doing. It's impressive to think that in addition to being theoretical, to being an anthropologist, an activist, that you are also a musician, that you write and you sing and you play music. And I wanted to, first of all, know if you continue to write music and performing music. I want to know that. And what is it you're writing now? What is it you're singing now? And what role do you think art has in the transformation, in social transformation? Yeah, well, thank you for that question, because that's a part of my life which is so important. I began being a musician and then became an activism, and through activism, art became a way to do activism way before I did music. My father's legacy brought music, and I live in a country where music is everywhere, all the time. Everything is music. It's our logic. I began, first of all, as a singer-songwriter. I have 2 musical productions. There was a coincidence with my migrations. I made a living in making music. I went through places earning a living. Therefore, academia was a coincidence, because when I arrived in Colombia, before arriving in Colombia, I was not as involved in academia. Through activism, those articles in 2007, we would construct it through our activism. After having started in the School of Gender Studies, first I was invited to be a faculty and then curriculum coordinator, and that's why I'm there. I'm not an academic. I give classes, but my work has been developed primarily with the comrades through activism. I don't spend energy in trying to work through index journals. I'm not concerned about that. The majority of my texts, and now one is coming out, has to do with activism, not with the academics. Music in that way is very important. And given the migrations, it was very hard. I lived in many countries to begin to insert myself in the musical logic of the country. It was very tiring to go to concerts, to figure out where I fit in. And it's very exhausting. People think that it's beautiful, but it's exhausting. And so when I arrived here for the first time in my life, I had a job, a paid job, and that gave me the opportunity to move a little bit further away from being a singer-songwriter a little. And at that moment, I made the decision to do collective art. And that's where I started to do the drumming circles or batucadas. In fact, I was the first to do a drumming circle here in Bogota. I don't know Colombia. Now there are many, and that's good. A batucada that with all the difficulties, because it's not just, there are very few Afro women. At some moment, there were 3 indigenous women, but we've proposed through art to do an activism which is less boring, an activism that brings music together with a proposal around the matrix of oppression. I need music very much. When I go to the Dominican Republic, and I go all the time, I get together with all the people who are musicians over there. My brother is also a musician. I get to the Dominican Republic, and that part revives that I do here. But music has always been in my life, and I am convinced that art, and this is that Afro women know that music, dance, that cultural expressions are so very important for a very simple reason, because that connects emotion. It brings the word, it connects a memory, an ancestral spiritual memory with what we're doing today. And I think that Afro peoples, they wouldn't have, I'm not exactly sure, but like the Haitian Revolution, without its drums, it would not have been possible. Without our spiritual expressions such as voodoo, I'm convinced that art, and we see it in the national strike in Colombia, it's something that mobilizes and something that moves human empathy, and I'm fully convinced. Thank you. Well, I have a question from one of my students, John Manden, and I'm going to read it. It says, "Thank you, Dr. Ochy. You challenge us to how to rethink identity and the knowledge in feminism and decoloniality." My question has to do with how the decolonial school describes the narrative of mestizaje and allows whiteness in Latin America and the Caribbean pass through a racialized identity against the global North. How is it that the Black feminism face the decolonialism so that deconstructs this epistemological whiteness? Thank you so much for your words. Such a good question. I think that Blacks have done ourselves. We've done it. There's a palette of colors in politics and proposals. Every day there are even more proposals. I don't want to represent Black feminism. There are Afrofeminists, there's diaspora feminists, there are decolonial. There are so many proposals, and they are joined by many things, but there are many things that differentiate them epistemologically, and how does the political action be carried out. And the other thing is that I think that it's been a long time since the Black feminists have been defying decoloniality. What I've just did with genealogies and examples, question these productions, these ways of seeing reality, to see it in a fragmented way. I think the contribution of Black feminists has been that that produces a series of concepts, theories. They've been produced by Black feminists. That's undoubtedly the case. That's the point of the beginning. That's the fundamental start. And I think we have to understand, I think that the whitening, not just having white skin, but all of what is meant to whiteness in thinking, in moving, how we relate to each other, to institutions such as the national states, to continue to think as white people is to limit ourselves, to think that the state has to include us in its paradigm, in its colonial paradigm, to think that our struggle only has to look for space within the universities without questioning what's the depth. How does the knowledge get produced in those universities? To question the university using decolonial logic, the production of knowledge, to look for equality's sake, without going in depth on the issues. Or sexism, that's to be white in theology. You can have all the black skin you have, and the majority of people are connected. It's not enough to be black, but also, what are you thinking? What's your project? And so, what I believe is that if blacks have faced this coloniality, there's a lot of work to be done. There's a logic, especially in the Afro movements that I know, not just women's movements. They're highly pro-establishment, that they accept any money from international corporation without asking, from north to south.
And especially with the racialized populations and the implications that that would have, they accept any public politics that doesn't deepen on that or doesn't delve in the complexity of that, because the national state is not going to go deep into the topic of racism. They simply include us so that they can say that they are part of the national state. That is thinking like a white person. So the widening is a topic that we need to work not only in the attitude that one has as a black woman, or in identity politics. And that's what my proposal is, that it needs to go a lot deeper than that. Yes, I have a question about that.
Dices en tu crítica
I think it is very important what you say in this critique about the international cooperation, and we need to think about the agenda. What comes with that monies? And I think that in the presentation and in your work, it seems like there will be a possibility of solidarity or a feminist solidarity from north to south. And I wanted to know if you can talk a little bit more about how we could construct that, if there are moments in the history or in the present that you could see that could take us closer to what would be a solidarity that really not only is decolonial, but it doesn't reproduce colonialism. What should we do in order to have that type of solidarity?
Yo recuerdo que Sandra Mohanty, en uno de sus textos, ya además hablando con ella, ¿no? Ella opta por la solidaridad feminista transnacional.
She opts for transnational solidarity. And many of us have questioned, what is that international feminist solidarity? It's not enough for people to be feminists for me. And moreover, not enough to be a feminist, a transnational, or a black feminist. I want to know what are the political policies. Black feminists can be an identity at some point. Of course, other people could be a black feminist based upon another place. On the one hand, that's on one part. We have to make the context more complex. It's not the same. It's not the same as a black woman from the U.S. or from Colombia or every other country, North and South. there are complexities there. We could do an analysis, a general analysis, but we would also have to make that relationship known, North and South. I understand the fundamental question is based on Black, feminist, and Afro diaspora from the North and from the South. And I think the first, and what I said in my proposal, how do you make history with our experiences? Because if we go through the politics of identity, we're screwed. Because for that reason, it's not the same an Afro-feminist North American or an Afro-feminist Colombian or Afro-Dominican. It's not the same because the culture, the construction of the politics are different. The place, if you're Afro, it's not the same Afro that we have here on this side. It's very wide, that, and so one of the things that is important is to make history, and in this making history, to relate to make relate histories. The majority of our ancestors, mine and yours, have common histories because who did the national stories, the regions, who was the colonial logic? It was, which would mean to recover, to make disappear, at least mentally, these borders that have been made. That would be decolonizing our minds. That's not just solidarity. That's constructing a political position. It's not just being solidarity. It's not just being. It's not just as a principle, but it would be more, which are within that historicity, that history. What are the keys that recover a dignity, a transnational dignity? I don't like that word. A dignity beyond nations, because transnational could be something else. This thing about the construction of territories and to divide, without forgetting that this is also, there are privileges there, racial, class, the nationality, for example, etc. But we have to overcome politically this type of questions. The other thing, I think, to finish that question, for a long time now, I have been saying I am not a separatist any longer. I was a separatist. I was an Afro among whites, separatists as lesbian among heterosexuals, separatists among not anymore. The project has to be a common project between men, women, queers, sexual dissidents, indigenous folk. Why? Because one of the limits of the identity politics was to get into our niche. And that the national states proposed the difference. The indigenous, the Afros over there, the political things for the Afros, the things for the indigenous, but a proposal that is decolonialist proposal, our communities invented it, not us, is that people live in community. And in community, it's women, men, dissident, by dogs, by the river, by the mountains, and everything. And so this is the project that, at least, that in a decolonial aspect, I would like to achieve. What does that mean? What does it mean? That separatism doesn't make sense. For many people, yes. It depends on where they're at, what their project is. For my political project, it does no longer make sense. It did make sense at a time. But I think more and more men, Black men, have to work their own sexism, their own violence. Black women, many of them have to work their homophobia, her lesbophobia, etc., etc. Many of us must work our classism in relationship to other communities. Many of us, we have to work everything. Just like the proposal in the Black feminism to talk about the oppressions, we also have to look at our own navel and say, what are the politics that we are reproducing ourselves? Thank you. I have another question. I don't know if Gilberto wants me to tell you what his question is, but one of the students, Marvelous, who works in the Collaboratory, and some weeks ago we were talking about, he's Dominican American, and he asked me about he wanted to know about migration. If you could talk more about those migrations. One of the things we talked about that we wanted to know more about you, was if you believe that your work, the work that you've done, especially the written work that you've done, and within the university in Colombia, if that type of work could have been possible if you would have stayed in the Dominican Republic. And so that brings us to a question about place. One of the axes of your work, on one hand, is to think about the shared experiences and to see the moments where Black women, Afro women have seen those connections. But the other side of it, there are specifics. And I don't know if you, through your experience as a migrant woman, if you can speak about the possibilities and the limits of having political, radical politics, feminist, lesbian, in those spaces, in Dominican Republic, in Colombia, Mexico. How interesting. The other day I was thinking about, well, I'm not going to start there. I'm going to start to say that a great part of what I've reproduced and my activism has been based in the Republic of the Dominican Republic. The Afro activism has been in the Caribbean, joined with Haiti. And it's very important because I don't want to say that it was the migration that made me more. I think we started from there. Those are the stories that I'd like to recover, because in the Dominican Republic, in the geopolitics of the global politics, is a very problematic place in relationship to other countries. And I do want to say that the Caribbean women for a long time have been doing an impressive work. The Caribbean has been fundamental to understand decolonialism. These thinkers, that many of them are white or mestizos, couldn't think decolonialism without considering the Caribbean, without the resistance in the Caribbean, starting with the French Revolution. It's not to say that they're not serious issues, of course, in between the Dominican Republic and Haiti because of the decolonialism. Many of us, we began to produce there in the Dominican Republic. And then I leave in the 2000s. I leave in the Dominican Republic. And it doesn't mean that I haven't traveled before that. It's an important thing. I have traveled because of my activism, with many times with $25, but I was invited to go many places, and it was a privilege. And that privilege was what made me see these differences that you mentioned. And the conversation with Afro women who were from different countries, the transnational feminism, that is a type to see what are the differences, the debates and the tensions that appear through the different groups. And Gilberto, there's something very important that you're pointing to, and it's the condition of being in a diaspora. The other day I was saying that I wanted to write an article about how does knowledge get produced from the diaspora? Understanding diaspora like a relationship between migrations. Why is it that people who leave where we were born, where we were raised, we always look towards that place? We look at it with different eyes, and at the end, in the last years, the last few works have been about the Dominican Republic, with a vision, more critical vision, more complex vision, because I am from an island, and the island has the sea around the horizon. It has very limitations. It's not the same thing as here. You can go from Colombia to Venezuela, or from Venezuela or Colombia to Brazil. To be able to leave, even though there's a lot of migrations, we have to cross the sea on a plane. So that place to be part of a diaspora has allowed me to produce even about the Dominican Republic from another point of view that I didn't have. And I think that is also a privilege, even though every person who migrates knows very well that migrations is not easy. I have gone a lot of work around migrations. With so many years, I've been very stable now. But yeah, I take out my guitar and I sing and I buy a piece of bread. There were moments of that sort. There were moments, today I can say thanks to that, I have what I have, which is not a lot, but I have what I have. So I do believe that they're different places. And I want to rescue that our production fundamental has been done over there. And it's been done over there because I've never left the Dominican Republic. Every year I go. We have decolonialist studies at schools over there with women who are incredible. The 3 schools are starting in the Dominican Republic with anti-racist, and that keeps going. That link that I'm here in Colombia, and I'm almost returning, maybe, probably. I don't know yet. It's that. It's the Caribbean as a important producer for all that the Caribbean means, not just decolonialism, but today, all, everything, it has importance, a political importance that we must study. Thank you. I'm seeing so many questions. I don't know. I didn't see the questions before. I'm going to try to present some that the public is asking. The first is Luana Moreira Hayes, y está en portugués. Professor Curiel, Leila Gonzalez, and Beatriz Nascimento make theories about the importance of the liberation of the Black peoples. How does the doctor see the possibility of creating a quilombo in our times? And what does a quilombo or palenque mean for you? Thank you very much for that question. In Brazil, the quilombo, I'm going to speak mostly from the experience of the palenques, called, as they're called in the Caribbean or Colombian. It's fundamental. We are working a lot to recover the cimarronaje, not just as a past history of liberation, but also as a present story of liberation. That's to say, the resistance that the Black peoples are, our Afro communities every day are cimarronaje. And it is called cimarronaje because it has a project to recover dignity, has a project to act as in a collective manner. There were individual cimarrons, but it's always been a collective voice. It's always been a way to reinvent. It's a key element. How it's reinvented. People always have an exit result. Material. I completely agree with Leila Gonzalez and Beatriz Nascimento. We also have worked on cimarronaje, not just spending time in that experience of liberty, in that ancestrality, that past ancestrality. This is like a long memory type, like building the relationships between those ancestors to today. And today, we're full of cimarronas and cimarrones. We are permanent cimarronas facing racism, and I agree. And I think that has to be worked more. There's a lot of interesting work to be done in that area, not just theoretically, but also we have to create the ethnography in our community, in our grandmothers, in our aunts, the whitening almost doesn't let us see it. There are many questions that are still here, but we are getting to the end. Thank you so much for all your information, all to share a part of yourself with us, and to speak about your own biography, about your own experiences. It has been marvelous. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much for accompanying us, joining us, giving us something to think about, so much to think about and to reflect upon, and to converse about, to have discussions on. From my part, I hope that this session and that the written work from the professor Ochy Curiel will be an important part that could have an influence our conversations as a whole.
En la vida, ¿no?
But in life itself. Thank you so much, Ochy. I hope that we are in contact once again in person, that we would be able to receive you here. Yes, please. I need hugs. I am in a crisis. I'm in a depressive crisis with this lack of hugs. Same. Yes, I'm so happy. I'm so happy first of all, for all the invitations, all the work that you've done. This proposal that you have in the university is you have the privilege within the Black feminism that to be able to count with that, to be able to use that, to have access to that. The article that you translated, it was written in 2007. I'm happy that it was useful for something. And between all of us together, we have to continue thinking, reflecting positively. We have a lot of work to do. And I hope the young ones, because sometimes I get very tired. I know, what would happen to me without the schools in the Dominican Republic, but I know that I would have the same energy that I had before, which is what's interesting about these proposals. There's a lot of people who are younger, but who have a political action that I'm so proud of them. And I know there's a lot of people out there. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything. I hope soon we'll be seeing each other. And I wish everyone lots of health, lots of fortune, lots of good luck, and to live life the best way we can, because we have no other choice at this moment. Thank you. Okay, a hug, Ochy. And thank you for the interpreters. Yes.